Hey, good evening. It is 5 o'clock, and we are going to call this special meeting to order. Welcome. This is a special meeting of the Kent School District Board, which is held in public to comply with Open Public Meetings Act. The purpose of this meeting is a work session regarding the 23-24 school year enrollment, staffing, and next steps. I'm going to go to 1.03, which is roll call. At this time, the board will take a roll call for attendance. I will say each board member's name, and if they are present, they'll say something like they're here or something. Director Farah.
Here.
Director Clark.
Here.
Director Hamada.
Present.
Vice President Muriel.
Here.
And of course, I'm here or something. And 2.01, 23-24 enrollment staffing next steps. I'm going to call on Deputy Superintendent Dr. Behringer to begin this meeting.
Great. Well, thank you, President Benno, members of the board. Welcome to work session in the round or in the square. Trying something new this evening, so we're looking forward to that. Appreciate the opportunity this evening to be here answering any questions that you or your constituents have posed over the last month or so regarding enrollment, staffing, any other HR processes. As we move into the 23-24 school year, we're going to continue to do our best to put our forward-facing information out to our board as well as our community, and this is just one of those opportunities. As you know, we came into the 23-24 school year having moved 6th grade to middle school, opened a brand new middle school, changed boundaries in all but one of our schools, and added programs to some of our neighborhood schools. So we had hundreds of employees and thousands of hours of work being done to ensure that these massive changes had the least amount of impact on our students, schools, families, and community. So just a huge shout out to our data services and transportation teams, as well as our HR and finances teams for supporting this work. I know I speak for Israel and the executive cabinet when I say, considering everything that we went to start this school year off, through all the changes I just listed, although not significant at all, to only have 7 staff that were impacted by the fall transfer process, 2 of which were voluntarily transferred. We're very proud of where we ended up as we started the school year this year. The collaboration and teamwork with our labor partners, communities, schools, and families allowed the school year to begin with only a few setbacks. And like any organization, we'll reflect and strive to be better next year. So with all that said, this work session is a culmination of a couple of things. We started the 23-24 school year with doing a lot of things that we've never done all together at the exact same time. So we have data information to share with you tonight regarding those shifts and the community questions that have come up. We heard that you wanted information about enrollment, staffing, and vacancies, but you wanted it done in a different way, through dialogue and more opportunities for questions and open dialogue with us, and not a long presentation. So what you're going to have this evening is a walkthrough presentation that will be shorter in format, allowing for the majority of the time this evening to be open for dialogue and questions around these topics. And again, as you've noticed, we have several experts in the room, not only at the tables, but in the chairs in this space with us this evening. We appreciate their time. An outcome of tonight's work session is that we're going to be collecting your questions and the answers that are given to your questions this evening so we can create an FAQ that will also help support the district as we're moving towards a larger, more robust FAQ that we will hold on our district's website. So as we transition to the presentation this evening, I just ask that the board members, you have blank paper in front of you, you have laptops, some of you. If you want to take notes, write down the questions you might have as we're going through the presentation so we can refer back to things or any other dialogue points or comments that you have. And so then once we finish the presentation, I will open it up and we'll begin dialogue for the remaining time of the evening. And we have until 7 o'clock tonight. We anticipate the presentation taking probably not more than a half an hour, so I'll leave almost all the time for questions and dialogue with our experts in the room. So with that said, I'd like to hand it over to Ben Rarick, our Associate Superintendent of Finance, to begin with slide number 3.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Okay. So just briefly to highlight that when we started the enrollment projection process last year, Obviously, it wasn't a typical year, so there are a lot of things that we did that we would do of any year, which would include sort of the cohort analysis, keeping our ear to the ground for community trends, demographics, things like new building and construction, these sorts of things. But then there was a whole nother layer to the process this year that was really driven by three things: opening of the new school, the district-wide reboundary, moving sixth graders up, afford, and what can we do? Next slide, please, Carolyn. Okay, so just a couple of historical slides to ground us in where we've been. So we went into this process having dropped about a couple thousand students from our high point in 2018. And so we were projecting a modest increase going into this next year. Next slide, please. At the same time that we were seeing that decline in enrollment, we were also more or less during that same time span seeing a gradual uptick in staffing, and we know that when those two things are in opposite directions, that can't last forever, right? Eventually that corrects for itself because it can't financially sustain. Next slide, please. So the next couple slides just briefly allow you to grasp what we projected, what actually happened, and what the net difference is, okay? So this slide, the first three bars to the left show some history of actuals. And then when you're looking at the second to the right, the second furthest to the right, that's the enrollment that we ended last school year with. That's like a final actual number of 23,093, or excuse me, 24,093. We were projecting to pick up about 100 kids, 98.8 kids from that number, okay? So then let's look at the next slide. So how did we do? Now remember, when we say how do we do, we're only looking at September, right? And people tend to forget that when we budget for enrollment or we report enrollment for funding purposes, it's for all 10 months of the year. So September is merely just 1 month, okay? And things can change and often do change throughout the year. But what this shows is that if we compare last September, which is represented in the middle bar, to the far right, which was the September that we're in, we dropped 49.1 students, FTE basis, okay? So you put the two together. We were projecting to pick up about 100 kids. We actually declined about 50 kids. It's about 150 kids difference. That's actually a great outcome for a number when you're talking about 24,000. To hit your number within 0.5%, we would take that every year. And so was actually expecting quite a bit more aggregate volatility than we saw. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I think we're transitioning to discussion of how this connects to staffing at this point.
Thank you, Ben. So giving you a high level overview in terms of the work that HR does after we receive the staffing information or the enrollment information from finance. We start the staffing process. Actually, that's happening as we are awaiting the enrollment information, to include the IVT process, which is the involuntary transfer process. Jamie will speak to that. The recruitment and retention, that has to happen simultaneously, right, when we are staffing our buildings. Irene will speak to that. The one topic that we haven't discussed much in a public setting is the importance of our substitute services department. So not only when assignments need to be filled for individuals who are out for leaves, being sick, we also fill the vacancies, right, that we have. Anita will speak to that. We have to take care of our staff, right? Most important piece is taking care of our staff. Brianna will speak to that. And then the work of our labor team. So Christine will speak to that. I wanted to share some news. The next slide, Carolyn, hot off the press. So this morning we talk data every day in HR. And here's some new information that we didn't have until this morning after pulling it. So 30 new paraeducators hired since September 4th, but we think it is a result of the pay increase, partly. 22 were hired for special education positions, and we haven't even sent out our flyer. Irene is going to get more into that, but we're definitely encouraged by these numbers. 72 active candidates who have applied for over 300 they account for over 300 of the applications for the paraeducator positions, and then 75 applications for special ed paraeducator positions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jamie.
All right, I'm going to go over some staffing pieces, and then we'll talk about how we move staff around the district. It's not going to be full scope staffing, but this first slide specifically speaks to our basic ed classroom staffing, and this shows this current school year reduced FTE by 59.4. It doesn't include our positions such as Title Lap, our MLE student or MLE FTE and SPED, or the library, in-building library positions, or PE or CTE. So this is specifically basic ed classroom. Broken down a little bit more for you, you'll see the reductions at the elementary school. 20.5 for K3, 93.5, 4 through 5, but really 6, because we did move, that's comparing last year's FTE 4 through 6 to this year's 4 through 5. So it's a larger reduction because of the 6th grade move up. And then you'll see at the secondary level, we increased by 54.6 FTE. Specifically wanted to speak to the increase at the middle school level, that 69.6 FTE. That really is moving that additional grade level into middle school there. So that is our basic ed FTE. And then I also wanted to just highlight some of our bigger buckets. It's, again, not all full scope staffing, but did want to show you just some increases as well that we have for certificated staffing. Our SPED staffing, MLE, CTE, and counselor staffing all went up in FTE. Paraeducators as well for all 3 of those, SPED, MLE, and CTE. And then our clerical staffing is broken down for you. At elementary school, you'll see the 84 hours reduced, and then because we were moving 6th grade, we've accounted for the increase at the middle school. We also opened a new middle school, right, so we had to staff full staffing there, so clerical hours were part of that, obviously. And then our DPs, registrars at the middle schools, moved from 10 months to 12 months just to support the increased workload as well. And then you'll see the high schools increased. And our academy buildings, when we refer to academy, it's iGrad, KVA, TOP, and KLA, Kent Lab. Next slide. So to dive in a little bit deeper on how we moved staff around, we knew it was going to be a big year for staff movement, so we planned early. We did a choice survey. We worked with our KEA labor partners to be able to do a pre-spring IBT to provide some choice for individuals who might be interested in moving from the elementary to the middle school level. So we started that around February. We put out the survey and we've got lots of responses back, and we ended up shifting 38 staff members from elementary to the middle school level before we began the spring IBT. With all the shifting, we had a pretty robust spring IVT. We don't typically have 76 participants. It's usually 35, maybe. 17 of those were volunteers, 59 were involuntary transferred. And then with all of that movement in the spring, we were able to reduce, as Dr. Behringer stated, the impact for the fall IVT. Once we settled, students came in, we were able to see what shifts could we make in building, just grade level wise. If we had overstaffing in one grade level but understaffing in another, we could move within building and not have to shift a teacher out of that building. And all of those shifts, we ended up with 7 fall IVTs, 2 of them were volunteers.
Thank you, Jamie. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So I'm here to speak to the open positions, specifically right now to our inclusive education positions. So currently, as of today, we have 70 IE para educator positions, 58 that have agency staff in them, and 20 IE teacher positions, 5 which have agency staff in them. Something just to keep in mind that our team does is, so even though there are agency staff in those positions, we continue to monitor and we continue to count them as open, just because we are continuing to recruit for those positions. So as Mr. Hunter mentioned, for recruitment, so something that was top of our goal this year was just to get out to our communities. From the conversations that I have presented or ended the previous school year, we wanted to get out to our communities, make sure that we were in our schools with our families, and with our families from our schools. So we have attended, as of this week, 20 back to school open house, ice cream social, open houses, and one sporting event. We typically give about anywhere from 50 to 100, 150 flyers, so that's about at least 1,000 families that we have already touched, hence what we've been seeing with the hires thus far. For the career fairs, we started the first career this fair even before school started at the Kent YMCA, so once again in our community. The second one was here at the district, and then we have I think 3 more lined up. So we have one of them which is going to be in our community-based, in a community-based organization. It's at Vine Maple Place, also heading over to WSU. That's one of the new schools. Also, they have a SPED program. And also our Kent Lake and Kedwood juniors and seniors, they're gonna be having a college and career extravaganza on November 7th. So we're gonna be attending that one as well to talk to our students. Also, I mentioned with the flyers that we have given out so far, it's been about 1,000 families. We're working on the postcards right now with our communications department. Last year, those postcards ended up being for 64,000 households. So just so that you know, going forward, we're anticipating that for the beginning of October. Let's see here. And then for retention, so this is the first year after the last 2 years of being in COVID and just that whole process that we are holding in-person new employee orientations. We've done 17 in-person thus far. And this really gives the opportunity to our employees to ask us questions where they're in person, just help them guide and navigate them through those first weeks that they are here. Once again, for retention, our cap salary was huge, and that was one of our largest reasons for turnover, so hoping to see a positive impact from that. And then we have had conversations just on reviewing and enhancing our employee recognition, so especially those employees that have been here for a long time, what are we doing for that staff, for those staff members? And I spoke a little bit to the SPED positions here, the 70 and the 20. So once again, just even though we have agency staff members, even though we have substitutes, we continue to advertise and recruit for those open positions. next I'll hand it over to Mr. Spencer.
Thank you. And so one of the things there's really two slides we wanted to share and highlight a few details as well from past board meeting topical conversations. One of them is really, what question are we answering, right? So one thing is around vacancies, the other is what does that look like, inclusive of agency staff members, inclusive of our sub-staff in the buildings, and then what is still unfilled after that, and what do we have a plan for those? And so this is a visual representation of that information, one slide for teachers, and the other slide for inclusive education, and the second slide in a second around paraeducator positions. One item I want to highlight, especially in the ongoing work between our different departments, is the fluid nature of this work. I think a lot, thank you. Sorry. I think a lot about what Vice President Margell had mentioned before, that there's a complexity to this, right? They're not really static numbers that we look at. They're really of a fluid nature. So each day you're talking about changes in student eligibility in terms of adding a need for positions or for students who might exit from some services. So throughout the course of the year, you'll see a movement and fluctuation in the number of paraeducators that are needed or the number of certificated staff that are needed in these. And so that does also account for some up and down movement. And so I think the first slide to focus on here is when you take that aggregate of filled by direct hire, agency staffed, and what is currently filled with substitutes, you have that aggregate total of about 97.3%, which is a different, kind of a different showcase of that same information when you see on our website, here are the number of vacancies that we might have. We continue to search for district hires for those positions are filled right now by subs and by agency staff members. So next slide, please. And so the same holds true for our paraeducator hours in inclusive education. And you can see this is a different representation, really around hours. What you saw earlier in a previous slide was around kind of positions, but we know for some of these positions, they're different hours, right? You might have positions that are 6-hour positions or 6.5-hour positions, or one for just the transit, right, to or from. So, and outside of that aggregate, we have here the total number of hours and what does that look like. And you can see a similar visual representation that between agency and filled, that number is more around the 92%. Again, that's going to fluctuate daily. And so we do track that with a lot of assistance from our HR partners. So.
Thank you. So I'm just here to kind of take your stance on pulling that data day by day and talk about how our substitute service office supports the day-by-day needs. And specifically, when we know we have positions that may be open for several consecutive days, how we're looking to seek long-term guest staff to fill those positions. So the data presented here on this slide talks about the fact that we are currently working with 31 of our guest teachers who are filling what we expect to be at this time long-term vacancies. So just a reminder that it's not considered a long-term substitute position until they've been in the position for 20 consecutive days. And 6 of our staff members have just reached that long-term status this week because we just hit day 20. So some of these we're talking about as potential long-term. Also, as Spencer just mentioned, depending on when he pulled his data and when we pull the unfilled data and when we pull our subservices data, we could be learning of a new agency hire, which affects maybe somebody not taking a guest teacher position, or we got confirmation that somebody was hired into a position, and so we no longer need a guest staff member there. Of the long-term positions that we are currently working in, or potential long-term positions, 16 of those positions are inclusive education teaching positions. 17 are providing coverage due to leaves of some sort, medical, family. 12 are unfilled positions. And just to let you know, we do have 16 unfilled potential long-term teaching positions, whether that may be because of a vacancy or because of a leave, that we are still working with our guest staff pool to determine if there's somebody in there that would like to take a position. So we've got somebody in there consistently for the students while we're looking to still hire. Just to give you an idea of how our guest staff pools have changed from last year to this year. And again, this is an ever-changing number as we're onboarding daily. But the most significant increase between the beginning of last school year and where we fall this week is in our guest teacher pool. So we have a significant increase in our guest teacher staff members. Keep in mind, our guest staff are eligible to work with KSD as they choose. So the amount of time that they're spending in those positions may vary. Also with our paraeducator pool, it is currently kind of flat, but as we've talked about recently, the onboarding is happening as our flyers are going out and our recruitment events are happening. We're expecting that to increase dramatically in the coming weeks. And also our guest clerical pool is kind of around the same levels currently. Just to give you an idea of a daily fill rate, these numbers, of course, every day change depending on absences of our staff members. But to give you a comparison, this is a look at just a window into the last year's first 20 days of the school year and this year's first 20 days. I do have an asterisk next to last year because the first 20 days included the pre-service days, and then we did have a work stoppage. And so the 20 days continued after September 8th when students were back in session with the school district. But if you take a look at the fill rate, we're talking about the number of sub-eligible positions that was filled by a guest staff employee. So we want to see high percentages in these areas as much as possible. And you'll see that this year, again, you can see a pretty significant fill rate for our teachers' positions in those first 20 days, as well as our clerical positions. And again, the paraeducator pool has been around the same level last year and this year.
I'm excited to share a little bit about the work of the Workforce Wellness Committee that I get to facilitate. This is in support of Board Policy and Procedure 5515, Workforce Secondary Traumatic Stress. So new this summer, we created a bank of wellness resources that is linked to our StaffLink homepage, which includes information about our Employee Assistance Program, which has a Talkspace platform for mental health support, information about Smart Health, which is through SEB, our benefits board, crisis hotlines, links to community resources, and this is constantly being updated with any information that's sent our way that we think would be helpful for our staff. And beyond just email, we're looking at ways that we can get this information out to staff so they know it's there, because I know everybody gets a million emails a day, and wanting to make sure that everyone is aware of what is out there to assist. And starting next week, we were afforded a grant this summer to participate in a well-being learning cohort that our entire committee will get to participate with a group of 12 other school districts across the state of Washington. This is facilitated by Kaiser Permanente, OSPI, the Alliance for a Healthier Generation, and ESD 114. And the goal of this is there's going to be 7 guided sessions that will work us through integrating data, resource mapping, and implementing a sustainable wellness program with fidelity. Knowing that this is a kind of new endeavor for us, this wellness committee began last year when this policy was implemented. So I'm excited to see the work of that.
Thanks, Bree. So if a picture's worth 1,000 words, I saved about 10,000 words right here. So get out early. I did want to share, I didn't get a picture of the ratification day of KPA, but I can assure you they looked pretty much like that. That is ratification night or early morning of KAP, the paraeducators. And this Monday, that's from this Monday, we did reach a tentative agreement with our Food Service Association. Next slide. So I wanted to share a couple of goals that we set for ourselves was to complete prior to the start of the school year for the principals for sure and for the paraeducators. Food service also, they delayed it. They wanted to start in late August. So they were pretty happy, as you see on Monday as well. One of the reasons I think that we had such success this year is, as well as the team members that participated and the support from our human resources and our finance department, it was stellar, was the different approach that we took. And I know we've talked about from an interest-based perspective versus interest-based bargaining, and I know there's been a lot of questions about, did you do the training? And interest-based bargaining has a whole framework. We did not do that. but we did share interests and were very collaborative. So it was a very collaborative bargaining process that resulted in really both the district and the union being very satisfied with the outcome of those. And that's, I'm going to turn it over to Christy.
So this is to talk about the itinerant staffing for both music and PE. We have 5 music positions currently open, although we are in the process of completing the onboarding process for 3 of those positions. We did have 1 position, however, the candidate has taken another position, so we'll be starting back with position 2, back at the drawing board looking for a new candidate. And we are have now made a recommendation for PE, so hope to have that in place, and those are updates since this was completed.
All right. Well, I appreciate all of our team members sharing their slides and their information. So with that, what I'd like to do is open up the work session for questions, comments, and conversational dialogue that allows some deeper understanding and some sharing around the topics that were discussed here and shared. Just a reminder, and again, I think I've shared this with the board in the 2x2s. Next week, we also have a work session. The work session next week is around updates around our boundaries and the impact as we started the school year, opening of Canyon Ridge, as well as our 6th graders moving up in the 6th grade model. And so there are pieces and potentially questions that may be asked tonight. If I step in and just say, hey, we're going to cover that next week, don't worry about that, we'll cover it next week. I want to make sure we can kind of stay focused in the enrollment staffing space this evening, so we can utilize all the experts we have in the room with that. So with that said, I'm going to open it up, give it back to President Benno, and you can open it up for dialogue.
All right, my colleagues, anybody have any burning questions? I wrote some stuff down, so I'm sure you all did too. So anybody want to start or have a need to or desire to start? Director Clark.
Can you hand the mic back over there?
Ms. McPherson, in the graph that you illustrated with, you had at the end long-term subs, and then you had 12 that were unfilled. And so I have 2 questions. The ongoing problem has been that typically on a short-term basis, if you can't get a sub, a building then requests teachers to cover. So I'm assuming when you gave me the 12 unfilled, which I realize were long-term, there must be some sort of coverage occurring.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the bullet point that says 12 are unfilled positions, that was under the 31 guest teachers that are currently filling expected long-term vacancies. That 12 is positions that we're currently hiring for. They're posted and they're completely unfilled. They're a vacancy right now. So that 12 unfilled is meant to say, like, we're hiring a special education teacher at a school. We don't have an agency person in. We're currently posting and looking for an open position, but we do have one of our 31 guest teachers in that position right now. The 16 down below there speaks to the fact that we have 16 opportunities for our guest staff to serve in a potential long-term position that we're currently actively looking within our pool to see if they can fill.
Okay, and then in your the comparison from August to September in the guest teacher pool was 376 up to 456, and the question is, how many of those new ads were former employees of the school district?
Of Kent School District?
Just roughly, I know you may not have an exact.
I would actually have to look into that. A lot of our folks, when they are choosing to retire or separate back in spring, usually mark on their form they'd like to continue with us as a guest staff member. So I would have to look and see how many, for instance, from last spring indicated they're moving from a continuing position into our guest staff pool. I do know of some. I unfortunately don't have a number for you tonight. I can look into that.
Okay.
A follow-up question just to make sure I understand the numbers that Director Clark was asking. So
Is there, how many classrooms are we looking at that we know it's going to be a long-term or have a pretty good idea, right? That are being filled day to day by different subs or maybe even every few days? Is that 12 number?
No, that's the 16 down below.
So that's a 16, okay, so we
Yeah.
have 16 classrooms that
Might
there's not
have
a consistent person there.
Or at least not, we haven't gotten the commitment from them to necessarily keep going, but as soon as we get somebody to say, you know, hey, I do like this, then we put them on our long-term tracker, because once again, we're trying to make sure that we meet the CBA guidelines around a long-term position once they've hit those 20 consecutive days. Sometimes somebody does commit to that, but for some reason may not be able to continue in it for one reason or another, and so they may not hit that long-term status. So just kind of depending on, we're currently working within our pool to find out if there are 16 folks that would be willing to potentially take on what may be a long-term position. And I say, the data changes pretty rapidly. So even to this afternoon, somebody could have confirmed they'd love to take that long-term position, and now our numbers have changed, or we've hired an agency staff person. So as I said, in the sub-office, these numbers change very quickly.
I appreciate the information about the substitutes. I know that they're such an important role within our schools. And that brings me to my question about teachers, when they don't feel like they have substitutes, the behavior that I've heard happening is that they end up taking, when they have things that they need to go do, doctor's appointments or things like that that happen during the school day when they're also working. I think we all understand what those hours are, right? That it ends up being Wednesdays that they're doing staff time. And so they're missing out on staff time and some of the training that needs to happen during that time. I don't know who to address this to, but what do we do? What do we do with that if we have teachers missing the time when they're supposed to be using it for training and the principals are having that time allocated for them when teachers are gone to take care of the things that they have because they don't feel like they can get substitutes during other times? And so then we have a problem of snowballing, right? Teachers don't get certain training because that happened during that Wednesday time. Like, what does that look like? And have we noticed that? It is something I've heard, and I would just like to see if we could talk about it for a little bit.
And Bree and Anita, I'm not sure if that's landed on your desk.
Not that particular thing, but I was a former teacher. I taught for 10 years. I can kind of speak a little bit to the guilt that comes with, right? Not wanting to, if you know there's a substitute shortage, right, and you're worried that it may go to class coverage and what that is and is an impact onto your coworkers, right? You may look for an opportunity to take the time you need, right? That may not require it to be a burden on others, right? So our employees do get the choice to use their paid time off as needed. I can't say you must schedule a dentist appointment at this time or that time, right? And I want them to be able to take care of themselves as appropriate. And so I think that when you are assessing it individually as a teacher, and I'll kind of look around the room to those of us that have been in that position before, you really do kind of try to think about those things and seek out what is the least impact to my kids, my students that I work with day in and day out. You have a lot of care and compassion for them, and you have care and compassion for your coworkers, and sometimes people may choose that an early release time, I think is what you're speaking about, and those alternate between the employee-directed time and the admin-directed time. And so depending on what their dentist may have available, right, I think those things do come up.
So what do we do when teachers then, I want to make sure that we're continuing to support our teachers in ongoing education, new programming and things like that. And if that ends up being the time that they feel that they can take it because they don't want to burden the rest of their staff, is just the idea is that we just need to have more substitutes? And so they feel like that they can take, I don't know, is this something being discussed? I'll
just kind of chime in here, having been a principal. I would say when staff have to make choices, whether it be on a Wednesday or on a teacher workshop day or any kind of day, I think it's up to the building leadership, as well as if you're at a secondary school, your team, to make sure you have the information that you might have missed. So as a building leader, if I notice that I'm missing 12 teachers from a Wednesday early release day and we did some professional development, that I would circle back around to those teachers to make sure that I created an opportunity or found a way so they could access that information, whether it be a separate opportunity or whether it be they have the documents available that they can read through and ask questions, things like that. So there are ways to do that. But again, to Anita's point, we can't really dictate when teachers take that time, and you know that. And so we really kind of are at that space where it's like whenever they're going to miss work, whether it be missing teaching class for the kids or miss professional development opportunity, I think as a building, we do our best to make sure that they are caught up or they have access to the information or that they missed, or they're prepared to be able to be out at that time. And whether we have subs or whether we have class coverage, I think it's on the building to kind of help create that, opportunity so it doesn't get missed.
Other questions? Director Hada?
I'm going to go down a different pathway here. And first of all, I appreciate, Mr. Hunter, the long email about the paraeducators and that going down the pipeline at Highline College and things that are coming up. All of that is very proactive and good down the future. However, when I look at these stats, I think we've got everything fairly decently covered that I can see is from a management position. But what jets out at me is our downfall in not having enough paraeducators in our buildings. We raised the salary, and I'm glad to see, that the 30 people showed up and that made a difference. However, we're still at 75 people. And I'm also hearing out in the field, talking to the people who are actually engaging in this, that a lot of the contract workers that we have supposedly hired are not showing up. Maybe they'll come one day and then they don't even call in. And I think in one incident, I don't know the truth of this is just what I'm hearing and putting out there from my public, that they don't even know if they're going to come in or not, and they've had to change agencies. So following up on those agencies, and I don't know, perhaps even if we have to rely on contract labor, incentives to the agencies to be more centered on the importance. I mean, I worked for an airline for a while. I couldn't even be 1 minute late, no matter if it was the traffic or anything, or I was fired. That was, and believe me, I was not late, and it just about drove me crazy. But perhaps incentivizing some contract people and agencies in a way to make sure they're doing a little more due diligence with the people they're sending out, that they realize the importance of, you can't just not call in. These are kids, these are people that are there, and then it becomes the teachers that have to take on all that extra responsibility. And I'm hearing that kind of trickles down to, making what we don't want, working conditions that they feel that they're having to pick up a lot or load. And if anywhere, I don't have all the answers to it, I'm not in the buildings, but we've got to do something about it. I don't know what it is. I called 3 different districts today, bigger districts, Tacoma, Federal Way, and North Shore, and asked to speak to all the human resource directors. Of course, I didn't get them on the line. I was pretty persistent, called a couple times and left some messages, trying to understand their situation, because some of our public has been sending emails, and their comparisons to me are not really totally accurate, because they're choosing districts that are 8 or 10,000 less students, which already skews the statistics. And also, even with one of the smaller schools, they had more para openings just in the email. I haven't checked and verified all that, so there's a lot of stuff to this, but what can we do? I mean, I saw on one website, Tacoma, where the front page of their website says, we're offering 250 to 2,500 hiring bonuses because we need people. And kind of had this pop out there on the website. So are we still actively engaged? We're starting the school year. We've increased the contract to the paraeducators. We're actively trying to get more people going through from the community colleges, the colleges, encouraging that. What else can we do, because we're not there?
Yeah, so we will stay persistent with just what you mentioned in terms of I use a basketball analogy, putting that full court press, right? Especially with the new not tentative agreement, but the new agreement increasing para salaries. So we're going to stay consistent with that and persistent. The whole piece in terms of what else can we do as a team, we talk about it every day. The bonuses, I love the concept of offering bonuses. We did that in my old world. We haven't talked about it here, but certainly a topic that we can discuss. But the main thing is that we need to be persistent, and we're looking forward to the data, optimistic about the data that will come in from the increase of pay. We know that pay isn't everything, but what we hear from our parents in terms of leaving us, it's very important to them, right? So we're looking forward to what the data will say a month from now compared to what it is now.
Another thing, I'm just going to bring this up in there. I absolutely do not know if there's any truth to it or not, but a lot of our paraeducators feel that they're talked down to and they're not valued. And I mean, that could be a small few, it could be a large few. But I mean, that's certainly something we can do every day of the week. And if we're not doing it, let's do it somehow, because again, I don't know about you, but when my plumbing goes out, that plumber becomes my important person, and I don't care what society, and some plumbers make pretty darn good money, but I mean, everybody has to be valued in this organization, and I don't know if we can throw parties for them, or give them certificates, or give them gift certificates. I don't know what the answer is, but
How we
I'm
treat
just throwing
people,
it out there.
How we treat people is a paramount urgency, priority for me, right? We need to treat people well, to all of our staff, right? Because we know that is going to keep them with us. And so we are going to continue to have those conversations, not just as an HR, because it isn't just an HR function to recruit and retain, it's the entire system's responsibility, to include our school board, right? It's the entire system's responsibility to help us in the recruiting and the retention effort. So we're going to be persistent. Again, that's a mantra of mine in terms of we need to treat people well. We need to do that. And so.
And I want to end this in a more positive note too, is Mr. Hunter, you've been always, I felt the door was open, kind, and understanding, and everything that I've heard since you came here has been very good. So I just want you to know that personally.
And that's a reflection of my team too.
And your team too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I just wanted to note that it is significant that we've hired 30 paraeducators in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, hiring any number of employees in any position over a 2-week period of time, 30 is a lot.
Yeah.
As far as all of the processes that have to be gone through to be able to get them hired and get them out into the building, that is a monumental task. And we know there are a lot more in the coffers now, and we haven't even gotten out to the full court press of putting all the flyers out there of like, hey, it's increased, you know, our salaries increased. When the agreement was finalized, then it started to get out there, but it's word of mouth and things like that, and just sharing it within, people started talking amongst the districts. So once we do even more, because again, you only do so many things so quickly when you're trying to fill all the vacancies that we've shared this evening that they're working so hard for. I think it's just important to know that 30 in 2 weeks, then if we can just see what that might look like 2 or 3 weeks from now, I think we're right on the right track, and the bargaining team did an excellent job of putting our paraeducators in an amazing place to be competitive in this region. So I think we'll see people coming back to us.
And can I just add to that, Dr. Behringer, so Director Hamada, I think if you had gotten in touch with those HR departments, right, they would have probably shared the same challenge, right, that we're facing. But what I'm proud about it with our team, we don't admire the problem. I mean, we are constantly talking about it. We know it's a challenge, and then what do we do about it? What do we do about it? So, as I stated, we're going to be persistent, consistent in terms of getting those numbers down in terms of the number of vacancies.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
May I add one thing on? I really appreciate your comment about being treating our paras with respect. And I would just say, and no answer to this, but thinking about the last time we were in the square, I think that respect needs to go to everybody. It needs to go to our substitutes, and they feel welcomed within their schools. I think that needs to go to our students, that we're treating our students with respect and just valuing them. I don't know, today I got to see an interaction with the first person you talk to when you walk into the counseling at Kent Ridge. And she was so kind to the students and welcoming, and I wish I knew her name, and now, as a sign of respect, I should have learned that, and I will. But I asked my daughter about it, and she's like, yeah, she's super nice to all of us. And that sticks with you. And so I think that respect needs to go to everybody within our district, and so thank you for that comment.
I'll echo that too, because there's been some places I would go to in this district and they were not very nice to me, and that's fine, but like it's not good for PR, like, because they got mad at me because I badged in without pushing the button. So like I get it, like, but like still be kind to me, and there's ways of, like when I'm upset with my students, I don't get an attitude, I just talk to them like they're still humans. And so I think like even from here, like some people would say, hey, you know, Joe, sometimes you get kind of a tone when you ask questions. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe then that makes people feel like I'm talking down or getting an attitude or whatever. And for me, I was just like, oh, I'm just being inquisitive. But it's something to keep in mind, like even up here, as we talk to people, as we ask questions, that we keep that in mind, because like respect goes all the way around, and like how we treat each other no matter what the position is. But let me tell you, when I go into buildings and without people knowing who I am, are still very nice to me, regardless of like, oh, and you're on the school board, oh, great. But they're still kind when I go in. That's what we want to see, no matter where, if you're in the library, whether you're in the counseling office, the front office, it doesn't matter. That needs to be everywhere in our organization. So I would echo that. And I'm not saying it's horrible, but I'm saying that we could do more to make people feel appreciated in how we talk to them, et cetera. So that's just something I've been told, and so I try to keep aware of that. And I think that's important for all of us to kind of take a note and figure out how we do for that. I do have some, I made categories of questions, but I don't want to feel like I'm dominating anything. Anybody else have any questions they want to ask? Can I ask one?
Oh, please. I think we all still have more, but
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
We got a list of stuff, so
Yeah,
go
lots
ahead.
of stuff.
Go ahead.
So I had a question about KVA, because I noticed that we reduced hours there. So I did want to ask a question about how are we recruiting students, or what's the recruitment process we're looking at for KVA? Because I know that we were talking about hoping that we would attract lots of students and families into that program to increase enrollment. So I was just kind of curious about that, and to see that we cut hours at the academy schools, not super concerning, but it just made me wonder if our enrollment's down, obviously our hours are down for clerical staff, et cetera, at the schools. I'm just wondering what we're doing for recruitment for KVA.
Well, I'll just start off with the idea of the academy schools. As Jamie mentioned, there's 4 schools in that. So it's not KVA specifically the lost hours, but combined through the 4 academies, hours were reduced. In fact, a majority of those hours were actually out of Kent Laboratory Academy, if I'm correct.
Correct. And sorry I didn't bring the breakdown, and I can certainly get it for you. So it's a deeper dive into each building and the reduced or increased hours. Are we specifically talking about KOP or?
I guess I'm asking about student recruitment to join KVA, I guess, because I noticed the hours were down and hours are connected with FTE, obviously. So I was just wondering specifically about student recruitment for KVA. Or if that's a question you can come back with for next week when we talk about all the other stuff.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, Faith was ready to, and I can give a little bit more information as well, so Faith.
I know one piece that they've requested a banner to put on their new location as people drive by, sorry. They've requested a banner to put at their new location so that people know that they're coming, and that's a high traffic area, so I think that's one piece that they're trying to recruit.
The other piece, because we do a majority of our recruitment from within the district, and when I say recruitment, we're not trying to, they're not trying to steal kids from comprehensive schools, but we all know that all students learn differently, and we want to be able to make sure that we create several opportunities for students on their own academic paths that may fit their learning style a little bit better. And so all of our comprehensive high schools, as well as our middle schools, since our KVA is a 612 program, have knowledge and information from the principal, Sean Lear, as well as the counselor over at KVA, for when those counselors are seeing kids coming through their comprehensive middle schools and high schools, and they're thinking about the best fit that may be able to meet the needs of a student that needs a different type of learning style or even atmosphere, environment for that matter. I know there's a lot of conversation in that space. Specifically, I can't give specific examples, but I do know that that is their main recruitment tool, is just making sure that the counselors at the middle schools and high schools are taking that into consideration when they're working with their students and their academic plans and how they're doing academically, that there are other alternative options in our district, not just KVA, but KLA as well. And when you get to different levels, you've got, you know, iGrad and whatnot, so.
I can speak specifically to, I'd have to go back to just to confirm, but I do know that we've added FTE for foreign language as well as art at the building for our students as well, so that's an increase.
I guess I was just more curious, and y'all can get back to me on that, just what are we doing for outside district recruitment? Because if we do it for recruiting in district, we're just moving numbers around, right? Like moving students and FTE, but I'm just curious about like that outside the district, because I know that that was a goal once to target the students who left during COVID and didn't come back. So I was just a little bit curious about that, but I'm happy to get those answers next week, yeah.
And I can just add, iGrad was next to me when I was at the Kent YMCA, speaking to students there as well, so I can just add that piece of it as well.
Awesome, thank you so much.
Is it not true? My daughter and I were talking about that in their district. They gave up their virtual academy and had to get out of it in some other districts. So I'm wondering if perhaps the advertisement overall, you know, we might be attracting some of those students that are not aware. I mean, how do we advertise for that are beyond our district? Do we kind of put that out there anymore than just, you're talking about internal? And you can get back to me if you don't.
Yeah, I definitely can get back to you. Your statement about other, or at least one other virtual academy kind of closing their doors, that is not uncommon. We've seen that over the last couple of years, that people have started it up either prior to COVID or as a product of COVID, and now as time has been going on, whether it be something that was covered out of ESSER funds or something that they thought was going to grow, has not really materialized in that way. And I think that's part of every organization you've got to reflect on, you know, is that working and meeting the needs as it was so designed or when it was created. So, but I will get you the information about how are we, similar to President Beno's question, how are we recruiting outside of the district.
I mean, I hope we don't close, since we spent a lot of money to open it. So that, I guess that's part of, I'm assuming what Director Hamada is kind of pointing out, is we want to make sure that if we spent this money and we're doing this, that we're going to keep it. I mean,
Well, but that's sunk funds. You have to look at it that way too. You're not going to continue to invest in something that is a losing proposition just because you've spent the money in the past. You've already spent that money. That's, I mean, that is what it is.
yeah.
I do want to take this opportunity to clarify that when we were looking to create the Kent Virtual Academy, it was not to try to attract kids from various different districts from around us. In fact, that's a different type of ALE virtual program. And so we are actually capped at the number of students we can take from outside of our district. And so we want to make sure that our objective was really that we had an option for our students who were looking for an online experience so that they wouldn't actually have to leave our district, and that option would be for them here in our district. And so I want to try to get across that we've never been trying to market outside of our district really to capture kids that were not our own.
Let me just say, I'm fully in support of keeping virtual.
Yes,
I want
correct.
it,
Yes.
but looking at what we've spent in the past is different than looking at forward. So.
Yep.
And that's really good to know, Mr. Heath, because I didn't realize that. So thank you for clarifying that. And I think, too, going to their graduation and hearing the kids talk, it fills a niche with some of our kids. And they would have dropped out of school or they would have done something else. So, you know, keeping that and doing that in that method is probably most financially beneficial, too, really.
Yep.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Can I ask a question about enrollment numbers? And I know we do counts, and there's just been some chatter about, we see this number, we see this number, we see this number, and I appreciated Mr. Pan talking a little bit about like
you're taking a snapshot in time, right? But can we talk a little bit about enrollment numbers? And can you also roll that into one of the slides that Mr. Rarick showed was the beginning of last year's enrollment and the end of last year's enrollment. And I want to say it was about an 800 student discrepancy or growth. I might be off. Oh, yep, no, that last one. There we go. From 23,781, I have my new glasses on, to 24,093. I'm pretty proud of being able to read that far. So we're, what were we talking about? 300 students here. So when we're looking at enrollments and where we have, and then we had the IVT, and then we know that we grew at least last year without being able to go back to prior years. And do we normally see a growth throughout the school year? And what does that look like, and how do we put that into our planning or not?
Okay. Let's break some of those down. So we'll start with the kind of what this means here.
Yep.
So I want to make a distinction between the bars that are labeled budgeted and the bars that are labeled actual.
Yep.
So I think when you were saying, oh, there's been growth of, I think
It's
you
from
were doing
budgeted.
head math, right?
I'm sorry. Yeah, what was?
Yeah. So what we do when we are developing the budget in the spring, right? Usually you have that final meeting in June.
Yep.
By the time we're there, we pretty much know what actual enrollment was from the year we're just completing, right? And so most of our sort of true analysis is based on, okay, well, we know what's real by now. We may not know that when we start in the fall, but by the time we get to sealing a budget, we know what's real. That real number, so to speak, is the 24,093.36 number, right? And so we projected to grow a little bit from that. We did not grow from that.
Yes.
We actually reduced by 50-ish, right?
Yep.
But part of what you're getting at too, I think, is that, it's one thing to say, okay, you hit the mark in aggregate. It's quite another thing to say, how did that distribute among all the various schools,
Yes,
right?
and expected growth throughout the year.
Right. And so, the expected growth throughout the year is sort of like if you can envision a depressed hockey stick, So you take that L shape, and you just flatten it out a bit. It sort of has a real dull curve throughout the year. And so typically we go up a little bit and then we trend downward, and then typically your lowest months are, the warmer the month, the lower it goes. So you get into, it's actually probably not a laughing matter, but it's a way of describing it.
Yeah.
When you get to April, May, and then June, that's the furthest end of that stick. So that's why we do, at the beginning of the year, a lot of people say, okay, we're looking at the first day of September, and they compare it to what we projected for the year.
Yep.
And they make determinations about that. And I sort of say, I'm more cautionary about that. I think the best way to do is look at apples to apples. Look at the count day from September of this year, and look at the count day of September from last year, and compare that as a true basis of essentially where we are at. And we lost 50 kids, in essence. FTE basis, we're down 48.8 students.
Okay, and so what I'm hearing is there is no discrepancy in our count days. Like what we've counted is I'm sure I'm not the only person who got these emails, that we're seeing different counts.
Well, certainly each day we have a different count.
Okay, so it could be a moment in time that we're looking
totally.
at.
So, okay. All right, so one plausible explanation for that, for example, is we meet every day for the first 7 days, right?
Yes.
And we collect counts from each day. Every single one of those days is different,
Yeah.
right? And then we quit meeting, and then we come back on actual official OSPI count day, which is the count that really matters. Unfortunately, that generally comes a little bit later than what we need to get IVT going, but it is the number that goes for funding purposes. And so absolutely, so we may even have a board presentation and say, hey, we're at 23,976 or something based on day 2 or day 3 or whatever. And September counts are guaranteed to be different than that, both in aggregate and typically by school as well.
Okay, thank you for answering
Yes.
the first one.
I'm sorry I didn't understand the first
But
one.
I think-
Because I asked 12 questions in there.
I think there's also some discrepancy because there was enrollment projections at the schools versus counts, and those were different too. And I think there was some confusion about the enrollment projection being the same as the counts, and they're not, obviously, right?
No.
And so a lot of the emails, when I'm getting those, like say something like, well, we were supposed to have this many students. I'm like, well, that was an enrollment projection, which is different than what a count is. And I think that's a lot of the emails that we're getting is a confusion about what those are. Can you go into that a little bit?
Absolutely. And this year was very different than a typical year in that regard. So first of all, just as I hope a self-evident fact, they're different every year, right? So whether we were doing a reboundary or moving a grade or doing any of those things, we will basically look at the last 3 to 5 years of a school, take a good look at the cohort matriculation within a school, and make projections based on that. That's never perfect, and it never will be because it is a projection, right?
People move.
Yes. And so that is what essentially that first couple weeks in the fall is coming in and saying, okay, where did we actually land, not only in aggregate, but by building, and what adjustments are necessary to reflect those changes. Now, historically, what has happened is, because we are in good faith complying with the contract with our collective bargaining partners, historically what that contract has said is essentially, you can add to fix a problem, but you can't subtract to fix a problem. Does that make sense? The gate swings one way. So if you over-projected in a building, you essentially just keep the over-projection, talking historically, right? But you were under, you gotta add, right? And so when we negotiated with our labor partners last go-around, that changed. That brought about what Jamie very articulately went over not too long ago, the fall IBT. That was something that existed in the district a while back. There was a hiatus of however many years, and now it's back, right? So this year, you're adding first the new reintroduction of the fall IBT. Second, you're actually adding sort of a two-prong projection process. People tend to lump this into one, but it's two things. One is you're projecting the enrollment for the building like you would any year. And then you are accounting, where we put the slide, but you're accounting for each one of those policy changes, and there were 4 of them. How is the enrollment going to be affected by redrawing of the boundaries? Well, you can make assumptions about how parents will react to getting a letter that says that their student is now assigned to this school, but that's different than the whites of that student's eyes showing up on August 25th, right? It's very different. So ranging from opening up a new middle school, redrawing the boundaries for all of the schools, moving the 6th graders up from elementary to effectively secondary, right? And the one that people don't talk about as much, but was equally as impactful, was material changes to site locations for programs. And that is the thing that I think, that there were 2 things that were just a ton of iterative analytical work in the spring. One of them was, normally we would do enrollment projections in the early winter, hand it off to HR, give principals a chance to comment on them, and then it's done. You're moving on, you're doing staffing, right? This year was not that at all. We had to follow that process at each point to see, okay, how did the reboundary affect, first, the letters that went out to the families, right? Second, the change in the assignment of the students for the new programs, right? Third, the number, what do we know at each iterative stage that tells us the best information, all the way up, by the way, to just before we broke for the 4th of July. All that we were having meetings on, June 30th about what are the pathing reports saying about the Odyssey kids and what, so this was a very, very different process, and you sort of add in the fact that it's sort of still in that space of COVID rebound, and some families sort of reintroducing to school districts, not just in Kent, but sort of regionally. And, it was without question a very labor-intensive process. the thing that was most surprising about it was that there were only 5 IVTs. I truly expected by a factor of 3 or 4 more than that. And that was the thing that I think we felt pretty good about.
Can you touch on about growth expected throughout the year, and do we staff for it?
Yeah, we don't typically, unless the growth and enrollment throughout the year is sort of atypical. And we do have that sometimes, especially if like there's a brand new school or something. You know, we don't typically make mid-year staffing adjustments for a building because, you know, November's showing 298 kids and December's showing, you know, 311, and then January's showing 296. There's a sort of typical oscillation throughout the months that if we were trying to chase that, just creates more instability than it eliminates. I would say the exception to that is with brand new programs, right, where we don't even know what the normal is.
Other questions, Director Farah?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. I just want to know, how can I wrap my head around slide 8 and slide 15. So slide 8, it says, you know, that's projected, and it's an actual 23, you know, 22, 23, right, 98.8 FTEs?
Yeah, that's September to September, yes.
Okay, so.
And that's students.
That is students.
So if you compare the student count that we have from this, literally this month.
Right.
First month of this school year.
Right.
And you compare it back to the student count we had from the September of last year. To sort of keep the apples to apples.
Right.
There's a difference of 98.8.
So the FTE meaning is just the student.
49.1, okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
So the FTE is just the number of students, it's not, you know, full-time teacher.
Exactly. That is student FTE. It's not head count.
Head count, okay.
It's FTE.
That's where I got
Yes.
lost.
And the significance of that
Right.
is that when we're looking at like elementary school and middle school, more or less, head count and FTE is essentially the same. It's not exactly the same, but when you get into high school, you have a increasingly large percentage of kids that are part-time running start.
Right.
And they might be taking a 0.2, a 0.4, a 0.6, and then going full-time at you know, Green River or something. And so, you know, there are some staffing categories at the high school level that we use headcount for. And then there are other staffing categories that we use FTE for, because you're not gonna hire, you know, on the assumption that for a full-time staff when somebody's gonna be there for one class, right?
And to go to slide 15, right now as we speak, we have 102 open positions. By slide 15, is it, I'm sorry, 16, I'm sorry, my bad. Yeah. Is it?
15, it's 15.
Is this 15?
Current open positions.
17.
17. This one right here.
That one,
Yeah,
yeah.
17.
So we have
17 on mine.
102 open positions,
They're educators, yes.
and then total of 46 teachers.
20 of which are sped, and 26 are
Or
not sped.
not sped.
And just to go back to
Right.
the definition of the 102
Right.
open positions.
Right.
Correct.
You know, as Irene shared, I don't remember if it was Irene or it was Anita, but 102 open positions means they're open that we want to fill them. It does not mean that there's not someone in there covering and being in the class with the kids and doing the work and all that kind of stuff. Just means that they have not gone through the process to apply for the job and be hired in that position, but we do have coverage in a majority of those. That was like Spencer's slide that he showed the filled and the unfilled. Yeah.
So that means, exactly right, so that is only, right now, we have unfilled 5.5 teachers. For IE teachers, right?
Just for IE.
Right, so it's like, that, I mean, this is still a number of hours for paraeducators. But the one that IE is only 5.5 FTEs, correct? If I'm,
Yeah, I think the key detail there, sorry.
just trying to understand, like, here's the district.
Yep.
How many teachers we have, and then categories of, teachers, paraeducators, special ed. I'm just trying to get my head around that, yeah.
Absolutely, and I think the slide that Irene had shared actually helps articulate this. This is a visual diagramming for just for special education, and we look at both those numbers, right? Like we look for paraeducators both on the total net hours as well as the number of positions, right? So, and one of those examples Irene had covered before was when you see those 70 vacancies in there for, say, inclusive education,
Right.
58 of those have a agency paraeducator assigned to them. So I don't know if that helps answer some of that question. I think the other component is very similar to what Anita was saying. There's a true fluidity each day. Like right now, that 5.5 we're looking at,
Right, it could be.
there's a update, I have right now that's like, hey, we have one of those positions just about filled with an agency member, which when that happens, what occurs is it removes a sub who was there, but that sub is reallocated prospectively. Like there's an opportunity elsewhere for them to fill. So there's this moving, yeah, and there's a lot of, one position gets filled, we don't eliminate the agency staff member. We look and say, hey, are you interested in this other position over here? Which then has an impact on our sub coverage, right? So there's a lot of moving parts in this process.
And same thing if that agency person is covering.
Right.
For that, and that position gets filled with an actual hire, because we're continuing to recruit for them.
Right.
Then now that frees up that agency person to
Go somewhere
somewhere
that is needed. And I also want to follow up with Irene. Are you able to share with us the number of employees that we lost, and what was the main theme that they left?
So for CAP, one of the main themes was salary. That was one of the, so the CAP for
Paraeducation,
paraeducators.
yeah, so that
One
was.
of our biggest things that we saw
was
for in the
salary.
exit surveys was salary. Hence why that was such a big, huge reason. And to Dr. Berenger's point, just once that increased, we saw that, and then we actually saw a person remove their resignation.
Oh, okay.
Once that happened as well.
Awesome.
And are you able to share with us what the number was? How many have we lost?
Oh, how many we lost? I don't get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, yeah, I just want to know, because then we can say that the percentage of, what's the difference, right? So if we have to do something more than increase salary, then,
Yeah.
we can.
And we will start embedding the themes into the personnel report.
Nice.
Yeah, so we'll
Can I ask a follow-up about staffing? And then I see Director Clark has a question. Last time I said something, it was very unpopular with some people in our community. Have we thought about converting some of the positions we can't hire to more like generalist positions, specifically at elementary, itinerant positions? I know PE has required minutes, but music doesn't. Have we thought about doing something like that? Because it's easier to hire someone to teach STEM one day a week and still keep music one day. I'm not trying to cut music, but keep music one day a week, and then maybe do STEM or something else one day a week. Then we could just hire a generalist and not a specific music teacher or someone who may not have that certification. Have we thought about doing stuff like that to kind of maybe mitigate some of these shortages? Is that a possibility? It may not be something that people necessarily want, but maybe a solution. But I'm not trying to cut music. One day a week maybe, but for temporary for this year.
But STEM still includes
STEM is still music,
and
yeah.
there could be some component to that in there one day a week.
STEAM.
So it could
Yeah.
be STEAM, sorry.
Yeah, STEAM, yep. Have we thought about doing something? I know that was not popular when I said that, but I wasn't trying to say I'm cutting music, but it's a way, it might be a way to hire staffing that don't necessarily need specific certifications, but then kind of reduce our number of open positions we have? Is that or is that something new? I don't know. Can someone answer that? I'm looking at Dr. Behringer, Mr. Hunter, somebody. Is that a new idea? Oh my gosh, I hope not.
I wouldn't say it's a new idea, but it's a conversation that has come up in emails over the last few weeks. But again, I think as every year we staff our buildings and our programs a certain way, and so then we're going out and we're hiring those people to fill those vacancies. And so when we look at like music and PE and things like that, I mean, those are our programs. And so without having conversations around, do we want to change what we do in the Kent School District to reduce the number of music offerings for our kids or PE offerings for our kids to have more of a generalist type of offering? I don't think that's risen to the level of, like, this needs to be a major conversation we're having and we need to shift how we do things in Kent. I don't think we're there. It doesn't mean that we don't recognize that we've seen several emails over the last couple weeks and heard comments and things like that. But I can't speak to that we are currently having conversations about doing that very thing right now. I don't think that's the case.
Well, I would push on that just a little bit.
Of course.
We had 50 people in giving comments about this very thing 6 months ago, about not cutting the STEAM program at Martin Sortoon, other schools saying that they wanted to have it. And so the idea that it's just in the last couple of weeks, I would push on that a little bit and say that there has been talk about that, and many schools saying that they'd like to have more STEAM. Now, I do hear that you're getting emails because we're going to hear both sides of it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And huge lover of the music. Both my kids are in it, programs. But I also hear that a diversified offering is also, especially in STEAM, in the world that we live in today, is not a new idea that's been brought in front of this group of people.
And I'm not saying that we haven't heard about the importance of STEAM and STEM and the impact it has on our kids, especially our families that came in to speak to that. There's no doubt about that. What I'm saying is we've just now started hearing about, hey, why don't we do that instead of our music classes we can't fill? That's what I'm saying is a new concept. Not that STEM and STEAM is important, because we had one of our assistant directors, John Rissmiller, came and tell us about how they're trying to make sure that STEM and STEAM are in all of our buildings in multiple grade levels. So it's definitely a priority for us as a district, but specifically the idea of hiring someone to do STEM and STEAM that's not part of our program in a school that we have music for, because that's part of what we do, and saying, well, we can't hire someone there, let's hire this person instead. That has not been a conversation or been on our radar until the last few weeks. So, because when STEM and STEAM came up about Martin Sortoon, we did not talk about, let's do away with some other classes and bring in STEM and STEAM classes for it instead. So that's what I was saying. It's like, when I said we haven't heard about it, we haven't heard about, like, literally stop doing this and start doing this in its place.
But it might be an idea. But that's what I'm saying. Maybe it's something, and again, not cutting music, but I know when I went to the school board conference, I talked to people who, in elementary, they had 5 things. They had library one day, music one day, PE one day, makerspace one day, STEAM one day, and then that's how they did it. It's 5 different things. I know that in Washington, we have PE minutes that's required. We don't necessarily have that for music, but I'm not saying we need to cut. Maybe we do need to add, maybe that conversation does need to happen, and how we look at that, because it could enrich our students, and maybe look at these schools with these shortages as a place where we start doing that and seeing how it goes, and maybe expanding the thought on that. I don't know, just something to put out there as a creative solution.
So I do have one thing. Dr. Kim is listening in, and she messaged me and said, they are in the middle of a needs assessment of the STEM program with the intention to develop a district-wide plan.
Oh, great. Love it.
And just, sorry, not to harp on this one more, but I know that we have different offerings in our different schools. We have some schools, middle schools, that have choir, and we have some that don't. And so while I understand that there is an importance of having consistency throughout the district for many different things, we've also shown as a district a willingness to have discrepancies. And so when there's a need and or a desire by particular principals to maybe try something different, something new, and we are presented with opportunity. I just see it as a, let's make lemonade out of lemons. We want to have, you know, the lemons is that we want to have these music teachers hired, right? We love music. But when we can't find people to fill those, let's make lemonade and look at maybe something different.
Director Clark had a question. Let's want to answer to that first.
No, I don't think it was a comment, not a question.
Awesome.
Christine, you had up on the graphic on your slide the wellness tools for employees. And for me, mentally, the first bell that rings is, of course, life and jobs bring stress, and counseling as a service is the first thing I think of as an employee tool. But what else is in that box?
It's actually free, so I'm gonna let her.
Yeah, so our employee assistance program is the primary resource we have that does have the, you get 4 face-to-face behavioral health sessions as a big one. There's also just a variety of resources that are available. I don't have the exhaustive list in front of me. The Alliance for a Healthier Generation is just has a plethora of resources about stress management. It's specific for education, so tools for staff to use in their classrooms specific to teaching, as well as some assessments, self-assessments available for staff for stress management is a big thing that I've been including. I can get you an exhaustive list of what's currently on there and available, but again, kind of adding any time a resource is shared with me, I'm getting that back out to staff.
And obviously, staff stresses come under different environments, and with all the change that we're actually discussing right now, I look at that. But is it true in a given year that there are peaks and troughs of when there's a demand for that type of service?
I'm sure there is. I haven't quite seen a graph of when our, so part of my work has been working with our SEB, I don't know if they're our liaison with us, so I have gotten access to a dashboard to kind of see use of certain tools, but that is specific to like our Smart Health platform. You can see what type of courses people are taking. There is stress management. So having just taken this over the summer, that is something I intend to be kind of keeping an eye on, because we also have the ability to customize some of the courses or activities that we can do as a district based on some feedback that we'll be getting. We are working on one of the things our team will be working on is a survey to reach out to staff to see what kind of resources they are most interested in.
To add to that, our EAP service does provide monthly usage information, so we can get that. It doesn't have employee data on there, but it does show the type of usage and the levels of usage from our staff, so we could provide some sort of level of data for that.
You want to share what that acronym is?
Employee Assistance Program, sorry.
And where is that on the website? Because I'm trying to find it.
Yeah.
I can't find it easily, so.
Yes. So the staff link, the portal to it, it is our staff portal, so it's only accessible to staff in the top right.
Oh, I don't think I have option to that, so that's probably why I haven't seen it.
No, I,
Oh, you do.
No, but I don't think I can log into it.
It would be your standard district login. So
Oh, well,
if you
then
have
that's
email,
my fault. Okay.
I figured you didn't.
No, I
was like.
I just want to.
Square.
Yeah, I want to follow up with that, because
Got
several
it.
times I got an email from some of the staff, and they say to us that the mental support is, mental health support is not there.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, how are we advertising it
Yes.
to the building so that they know and they're making sure that they can take advantage of these services that are being offered?
Yes. So as of right now, what has been shared out at the start of this year was an email just with a high level of what's included and a link directly to staff link to this homepage. We've also shared the flyers with our administrators so they're prepared and have that on hand for if they are working with an employee dealing with a stressful situation they can provide. But communication out is, again, something I want to focus on as we kick off this year of 7 different times, 7 different ways. How do we at least make sure people are aware? Because I've been tracking how many people click on my page, and we've hit over 100 now. I'm pretty excited, but I want that to be 4,000 because we have a lot of employees. But again, knowing that an email is not necessarily the most effective way, that is definitely something high on my list this year.
And we also give them a paper copy for their new employee orientation. And we actually have a slide for the staff members as well, letting them know, hey, this is your user code. These are the 4 sessions that you have available. So that's information that we give to each employee when they attend.
And some feedback that I did get recently, I can't remember from who, was trying to break the stigma. I guess, people feeling that it's not truly a confidential service. So trying to get that information out, that it is free, it is 100% confidential. Any data we get from any of these services is a aggregate who's accessing. But that'll be, again, part of the communication out.
Thank you.
There's some good stuff on here as I'm looking. That's surprising. I didn't even know it existed. Director Hamada, then Director Margot.
I'm just curious, do we have any type of emergency assistance program financially for our employees? Say they come on a crisis, they have to bury their parents and fly and lots, can they draw from their salary? Do you have anything like that? Just curious.
Not currently, no.
Okay. And the other question I have is, with our high school kids and learning about coming to work for our district, do we do anything like on a job shadow with our seniors to show them what it would be like to be a paraeducator? So they could actually see what it would be like to do that job?
So not currently, but great idea. So we go out, we take our roadshow, recruitment roadshow into classrooms. And so I think that's something that's a great idea, Director Hamada, in terms of looking into that further.
Would there be anything like you could offer maybe a credit or something for?
I can actually chime in a little bit.
Okay.
Actually, from one of our open houses, I was having that conversation, or I think it was KLA, one of the staff members from there came over to me and said that they were going to have a meeting around offering something, and they would like me to join. So I think more to come. There's a lot of brainstorming and conversations happening around that. So hopefully I will be able to share more for you.
I'm going to take the
No, go ahead.
I'm going to take the opportunity right now, though, to push something that we think could lead toward more kids coming and working in roles like a paraeducator and such, and that is our new outdoor school that is going to be starting back up again. One of the reasons we chose the program that we did was their comprehensive mentor training for high school students to serve as counselors at that camp. And we've been heavily recruiting. You can see on our district website, there's been emails that have been sent home to families. Anyone who has a high school kid in the district here got that email. They've been out at lunches at all of the high schools for the last couple weeks. And it really is, as someone who has worked with high school counselors in a camp session before, there are so many kids that had not thought of education as the way to go. They served in this role as a counselor and said, hey, I actually like working with kids. You mean I can do this for a living? And, it really has got that bug in them to go down that route. So I think that is going to be, it'll probably take a couple of years, 2-3 years for that to pay off, but I think we will see some of those students coming back and serving in our district.
And aren't we starting the teacher academy too, so they can do the paraeducator exam and whatnot? Wasn't that a thing that we were starting or looking into?
Yeah, part of what I mentioned just about the KLA piece, brainstorming with the piece, the para test, all of that. Yeah.
And I'd like to just add to, having come from Kentwood, there are opportunities for high school students to serve in like a peer mentor role in some of our inclusive ed programs. So we already have folks that are kind of on that pathway because they are having that experience and credit bearing experience on site. Additionally, we've partnered last year with our CTE department to talk more about how we can go in specifically to CTE classrooms to promote that, and how CTE department is working to connect more opportunities within KSD to what they're leading and teaching inside those classrooms, like early education.
Which has been a huge success. I mean, just to see the students' eyes light up when we go into those classrooms, it's been a huge success.
Throw in there that the counselors also earn a CTE credit for participating.
As they should.
Yeah.
Director Margell, you were
ACT.
Yeah.
I did also want to do a shout out. I have a friend who's been subbing in the district for a number of years, has 4 kids in the district, She has an entire relay for her team, is what we always talked about. So a swim relay with her 4 kids in the district. But working with your team for getting her full teacher certification. And she's been so impressed at, kind of that progression of starting as a substitute and now wanting to kind of move in, and just how great your team is in helping, is that your team? I see fingers.
Student
teachers.
Yes.
I
I was going to say it's probably also a bit of our professional development team. Everyone out there who's part of that, thank you for that
Yeah,
support.
so
But
no,
yes, also with our student teacher support.
Yeah, so it's, how we can get them, so she's going back to school to getting her teaching certificate, specifically because she just enjoyed the substitute experience that she had, and now just wants to become a full-time teacher within the district and be able to participate in that level too. So thank you for that.
Thank you for sharing that, and anyone listening, if you're interested in our school district, our website.
We're taking applications for bus drivers and parents as you leave the door here. Actually, it happened when you signed in to listen. I did have a question, and I'm sorry, that was a little confusing to me about the interest-based bargaining. And it kind of sounded like to me, and I'm sure this was not, that it was a question of, because there's training that has to happen, and because I'm guessing it's not because we just didn't get to the training that we didn't do interest favor. Could you just talk about that a little bit, and maybe why we chose the bargaining option that we did, and are we looking to change that? And could you just elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So I will contrast the positional bargaining, where I pass you a proposal and then you pass me one back, and we don't really talk about why we need it, all the whys, and that is one type of bargaining. And then at the very other end is interest-based bargaining. When you use that phrase, interest-based bargaining, that is a specific framework, and that involves a whole process of what you do and how you do it. Each person gets to contribute on a particular topic. You may stick ideas on the wall, you brainstorm, you sticky that. It's a very lengthy process, and I've been through the training myself, but it's not because we didn't want to do the training. It's because there's a better way, and I've talked to many of my colleagues, or many of my cohorts in other districts, and most of them don't do the full-on interest-based bargaining. They do something called collaborative bargaining, which is from an interest-based perspective, and that's why I said that, is because we did have the conversations. We did talk about the whys of our proposal. We answered questions about them. We brainstormed, hey, we're this issue here, we're not, how can we get closer? So it was a much more collaborative process. And that's what we hope to move to. In fact, we have a session with a PERC trainer on collaborative bargaining set up for this Friday with a number of us and one of our labor partners to explore that process for all of our bargaining. And that would involve also inviting our labor partners to join us in that training for collaborative bargaining. Whether they do or don't, whether they choose to or not, we're still going to do that and come from that perspective.
I have a follow-up question to that, because my question then to that would be, so what's our relationship with our labor partners where they'd feel invited or feel like they would be invited or feel welcome to come to and I don't know if that's a touchy question to say publicly or live, but I'm just curious what that looks like. Would all of our 10, 11 bargaining groups be like, oh yeah, we're all gonna send members to this training, or is there some that wouldn't necessarily be okay with that?
I think, and Damon, you can chime in if you think differently, but I think that I can't think of anybody who would not at least explore it with us.
You hit it on the nail. I think, so it's that whole relationship building, right? It's ongoing. It's ongoing, it's day to day. I know there's an interest on both sides with all of our labor partners to have that positive relationship. And so the day, kind of going back to what I said earlier in terms of how we treat people, how we interact with people on a daily basis, that matters, right? That matters. So it's daily that we are trying to strengthen the relationship so that we can do what's best for kids on a daily basis.
I just want to do a little time check. We got about 20 minutes. So I just want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to ask the questions.
Does anybody else have questions?
I've got a question.
Okay.
Can someone explain that, you know, the guest teacher pool? Does it, I mean, am I seeing it right that we have, what does that mean? Like, does it mean that we have, oh, sorry. Can you guys hear me?
We could just pull that out and hand it around. It'd probably be like, I'm moving a 20-pound stand or something. I mean, I kept waiting, but I didn't want to like, hey, here's an idea.
Can someone explain to me that we have 456 guest teachers pool? That's, I mean, is it a pool that we draw from, or how does,
So the 456 are onboarded with us. So they've completed all of their I-9 paperwork, their training requirements. They've gone through our NEO process. They're ready to roll. And so they are at-will workers. They get to choose whether they want to work 1 day per month, all the days in the month. If they want to notify us, some people have other life commitments, right? So sometimes we might get informed that, hey, I've been a pretty consistent guest teacher with you, but I actually am going to be out for a surgery for 2 months. So remember, please, that all of our guest teachers are also human beings who need medical leave attention, have life emergencies, things like that. And because they're at will, they do get to choose, right, how much they are working at. Some people have their favorite buildings they like to go to and tend to just pick up jobs at those. So for instance, we are hosting, it's breaking news because I haven't put it out there yet, but I've been working with buildings to host some basically open house tours for our guest staff to attend. So maybe they could visit a site that they've never been to before, just to take a walk around, make themselves feel more comfortable with it, see if it's a place that they would like to visit more often as they're picking up jobs in the pools. Because some of them are new to us. Some of them maybe have only been choosing a couple of schools and they're maybe interested just to visit and explore a new option. But really, it is their choice, right? So,
Anita, you want to speak to also how we have to compete with neighboring districts?
Yeah,
I'm not
I wasn't trying to give any
Yeah,
attention to our
that's a
neighboring
reality,
districts, but
that is a reality.
Right.
so it is a reality that we are in a competition.
Right.
So often our guest teachers, or actually all of our guest staff, could be employed by multiple school districts. So how they choose to change the financial status, bonus offerings, different incentives for those different pools is a factor. And so I will say that I want to give a huge point of praise to our KSD employees because we do get a lot of feedback regarding how welcoming our schools are, how positive they are. And I will say, kind of like Mr. Bento talked about, it can vary at location or maybe even by day, because sometimes we know that if there's a situation happening at a school, people may feel more tense about a potential stranger walking through the front door. And so there's always that ramification. We've talked a lot about coaching with our buildings and our administrators around how do you make your guest staff feel welcome, right? We are in a competitive market, not only for hiring continuing employees, but for that day-to-day work with our guest staff employees as well. And we always want to make that a little bit more attractive. So I will say, even with our recent KAP contract, we now have an incentive for paraeducators to work 90 days in a school year, that they would receive a bonus if they work the 90 days. That is something that we have been advocating for and pushing regarding special bonuses because it wasn't part of their contract before. So the idea that that's new, I'm hoping does encourage our paraeducator guest pool to pick up more days with us.
I wish us board directors were required to do some guest teaching, but unfortunately that's not real. But I think opening that pool and seeing what goes on in a classroom every day would be really, that's not gonna happen. But I think that would be really awesome if we could do that. Anybody have other questions? I have one. Do you all have?
I just wanted to also follow up the IVT, spring IVT and fall IVT. Can someone explain a little bit more on? I know and I probably know the answer to the question because, you know, in the spring when we were doing the border changes and sixth grade, we were asking teachers to voluntarily accept the change, but it said something like involuntary and then, right?
Yep, so that, the first item, the middle school placements for elementary certificated staff, that was a one-time thing that we did this last spring, just to bring down the numbers that we were going to need to do for the spring IVT, knowing we were going to be shifting staff around. We do a spring IVT every year. The numbers just aren't typically that high. I would say 35 is probably even a high number, 20, 25. Just because of the fluctuation within buildings, we have cohorts of students that are moving through. If you have a smaller, let's say a smaller third grade classroom, now it's in a fourth grade classroom, the class sizes are a little bit different. It's just, it's how the staffing fluctuates out based on projections. So we do need to move staff around just to balance out across the district annually.
Yeah.
So does that help?
Yeah, that helps, but also I see that 59 involuntary, so I'm just trying to understand is how did we communicate that involuntary information to the teachers instead of saying, hey, you're not going to be here next year, you go somewhere else?
Yep, exactly. It's a very step-by-step process. It's done seniority based, so we do first we start with the building principals. As we release staffing, they review their staffing. They're going to look to see where they can shuffle within building to take care of maybe some overstaffing in basic ed. They may have some positions they can shuffle around to. Resignations come through starting at that time of year as well. So there's a lot of shuffling and balancing around that happens within the building. Then once we get to through the timeline, buildings will take a look. Okay, here's where it shook out. I definitely am overstaffed here. Here's my least. First, go seek volunteers. We provide them a list of open positions as we know it at the time that individuals can take a look at to see if there's something they may be interested in volunteering for. It's also, so volunteers get to select first. It's also based on seniority. So they can take a look at that. And then, so then once that part is done, any buildings that didn't have a volunteer, then they will have a conversation with their least senior individual identified for the IVT. We have talking points that we provide our buildings to help them walk through that process. Our staff is also available to discuss what that looks like if individuals need. And then we also have a right to return process. So individuals that are involuntarily transferred and voluntarily transferred go on to a right to return. They stay on that list for 2 years. Anytime, let's say we IVT'd them, it could be they never moved a building. We IVT'd them in the spring. We had a resignation in June. We called them up and said, hey, there is a position that you're eligible to move back to, and then they move back to that position. So that's the shuffling of staff.
So we provide talking points to the buildings and make sure that that's communicated to. It's not, cut and dry.
Right, and then
it's a soft.
Yes.
handoff, okay.
Yep. It's a timeline. We walk through it. We walk through it with our building administrators, and we also walk through it with staff as we communicate out and we communicate the deadlines, and we provide them the open positions. They rank them first choice and so on.
And one piece that we're going to add is we want feedback. So those who have been IVT'd or transferred, we're going to add how's it going, right? So gives them an opportunity to provide us feedback, and then we can adjust accordingly based on the feedback that we receive in terms of the information that we're sharing with building leaders.
But provisional teachers aren't on that list, right?
Right.
So it's not everyone is available. It's only
Right.
it's seniority, but provisional teachers are left out of that, right?
Building principals are working through that. We have some exemptions, right, in this the collective bargaining agreement for teachers. Provisional staff are exempt from that, and there's some other factors as well that we would look at.
Got it. Other questions? I did have one about staffing. And I don't know, because I know the contract plays a role into what can be done. Like, hard caps is not a thing that exists in my contract. So, like, I have a cap of 30, but I may get more. So, like, I don't understand hard caps. I know they exist. So then, is there with contract language, and I know this maybe we can't necessarily talk about it openly, but like, is there a process for like MOUs or a teacher volunteering to like not, like if the hard cap was 29 and someone's like, oh, I can take one more student, that's fine. Is that allowed? Is that not allowed? Because I know that's been some conversation specifically with Odyssey emails that we've been getting. I'm just curious about that, what that sounds like, and I don't know who can answer that. Because I'm always like, hey, if there's a student that needs a place, I can take 33. I have 33 desks, fine, send them in. So, but in my contract, I'm allowed to do that, but then I get overload pay. So then I'm just kind of curious what that looks like.
So,
Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Chris.
I was just to say, there is a waiver process that can be used, and it's basically a letter of agreement to say that we're not going to use that for this particular person at this particular school, and in that process, a certain percentage of the building has to agree that, yeah, this waiver, they agree with it. I don't see it very often.
We have a waiver process in our contract too, so I was just trying to think, but it's like only once a year maybe that you're able to do that, but if it's something that's happening, is that similar? Or is that whenever? I just don't know.
It doesn't happen very often for that particular issue. In fact, I haven't seen any. But we do have that process, and we do have that for like planning time. If there's an assembly, you can get a waiver at the building to forego that planning time. It has to go through the process, then it comes to human resources and then goes back.
Yeah, there's a specific process in the CBA that spells out if there's an interest in deviating from the written word within the contract, there is that process, the waiver process. And it covers a lot of different things, but it is an internal kind of KEA teacher CBA process.
Awesome. Are there other questions, follow-ups, et cetera?
I did have a follow-up question from the open discussion we had last week about the pay for teachers, and I think, Mr. Pecan, I brought this to you, about when there's a missing para that is serving multiple teachers, that right now just one teacher is getting that additional pay for basically the work that they're taking on, but when somebody serves multiple, then how it is only going to one person.
Moving the road again.
I mean, the last 8 minutes is
it's
great.
never too late to learn, so.
Yep.
Thanks, Wade.
Happy to help.
Yeah, as with several of these items, there's a specific section in the KEA CBA that outlines the specific action to be taken. So the language is really written around case managers, so, and it's really around special education. So in this scenario, it's a general education teacher does not derive a remedy for that.
This is for special ed.
Right. So, but yes, to clarify, because those caseload numbers are tied to case managers, not to the classrooms for which a teacher is teaching, like not for a class session that they're teaching these students, but rather to the students that are case managed by that one particular teacher. It's the teacher that is impacted by the paraeducator that is assigned to their caseload, right, that receives then the remedy associated with that. I know it's a little convoluted
No, I
explanation
understand it.
Yeah.
I understand the words, but I don't understand the impact, right? One para serves 5 teachers, one teacher gets extra pay, 4 other teachers are taking on the work without the extra pay. Is it very my simple way of seeing that? Am I wrong?
I would say the paraeducator serves the students, and to deliver those services for those students are dispersed throughout different classes which may be taught by the case manager or not. And so I think the way that I convey this is we have students who are general ed and who are also receiving special education services, and they might be in a high school math class, right? So they might be in that class, They might be on different, there might be 5 students, and they might be on different case managers' caseloads, because that is a case manager who provides case management responsibilities to them. When we have that staffing allocated, it's not staffing allocated to the classroom, it's staffing allocated to that program. And so that program is tied to, we have a certificated case manager who has a specific staffing ratio that's outlined in the CBA, and the specific student service needs that we have to deliver on. And so the remedy is really tied to the case management responsibilities, not necessarily to the classroom service delivery, right? Because the same, and I understand the point, but the language of that, of how it's processed is based on the case management, not on the classroom.
But to kind of follow up on that, like last year when I taught health and I had a large class with 33 students, and there was a para that came to support 4 students. When that para was not there, I definitely worked a lot more that day when the paraeducator didn't show up, because paraeducators really do a lot to support classroom teachers. So I guess to kind of follow up on that point, like the work doesn't go away because the para is not there. Like I have to do a lot of support as well for the students who are not getting those services that day in my class.
And I think there's an absolute acknowledgement that there is an impact to any, when any staff are vacant, right? There are responsibilities associated with a building principal. There are responsibilities associated with other paraeducators. There's responsibilities associated with general education teachers. But I think specific to this question, the remedy that is asked about is specific to case management responsibilities tied to special education teachers pursuant to the CBA language that is in place. But at the same token, absolutely acknowledging that there are implications in any time there are some staff that are not able to be in that capacity, and we have students who need those services.
I appreciate that, and I also appreciate the correction of our para-server students. Thank you for that correction too.
Got about 4 minutes.
Any follow-ups, any other questions? Seeing none, we can finish 4 minutes early, so I'm gonna go ahead and adjourn. Then we're not.
I really like this work session.
Yes.
Because it satisfied so many questions sometimes we never had chance to ask. So I hope many work sessions to come, we utilize this type of.
You like this?
I like even this.
And the preparedness of everybody here.
Really, I like this,
There's a
because
lot of questions
us sitting
going
there,
on.
it just doesn't really help us at all. Sitting together kind of makes it more intimate, and then we can ask the questions.
And on non-board meeting nights,
Right.
when we do a work session that's
Exactly.
5 to 7,
Would be nice.
this is a much we can
Right.
definitely do this.
Absolutely.
But when we're trying to run a board meeting at the same night that we're
time,
trying to do
yeah.
a quick work session, yeah, so we'll have to live in
Right,
this
right.
moment when we have the opportunity.
But similar format, yes, I would
Yeah.
agree, even if we have
Absolutely.
board meetings.
Right.
This, having people, us talking, I
Right.
think is great.
Appreciate the feedback.
Sorry,
Other-
man.
Other questions, comments, anything? Seeing the time, it is 6:57. I'm gonna go ahead and adjourn this evening's work session. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching.